In 1962, these three men carved holes in their cells and broke out of Alcatraz, the most feared prison at the time. How the hell did they manage to make their own puppets to fool the guards into thinking they were sleeping in their beds when they were actually climbing the pipes behind the prison walls? Frank Morris and the brothers John and Clarence Anglin disappear forever after entering the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay in a homemade raft. Did they die shortly after? Or did they manage to step ashore to freedom? In this video, we tell the story of the legendary prison break that destroyed Alcatraz. If you appreciate my monkey efforts, you can support me by hitting the subscribe button. Thanks. Just 2 kilometers from the San Francisco coast is the island of Alcatraz. In the 19th century, a maritime lighthouse was built on it, then a military facility, then a military prison, and then Alcatraz Federal Prison. It operated as such from August 11, 1934 until March 1, 1963. They call it The Rock. It was created to be the most high-security prison in the country, where the most hardened criminals, such as Machine Gun Kelly and Al Capone, could be punished. At the time, the authorities in major U.S. cities were finding it extremely difficult to deal with the mafia and organized crime, so the government needed a symbol to signal to the public that justice would prevail. The prison is surrounded by high fences, and the number of guards is almost as high as the number of prisoners. Steel bars were the last word in technology at the time. In order to reinforce the image of a place from which there is no escape, some myths are deliberately created. For example, that each of the guards was a perfect marksman, when in fact some had no guns at all. The water in the bay was so cold that even if you reached it, you would freeze to death in just a few minutes, or become the shark's lunch, which there aren't any around Alcatraz. The water in San Francisco Bay is very cold indeed, but it has now been proven that the distance between Alcatraz and the nearest land is swimmable by man. The prison bosses probably knew this because the prisoners at Alcatraz were showered with warm water, so they could not acclimate to the cold ocean waters in case it occurred to them to try to escape. In 29 years at Alcatraz, 14 escape attempts have been made by 36 inmates, all of whom have been captured, shot, or drowned. Not including the 3 heroes of this video, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. There is actually one other person involved in the conspiracy, but he doesn't succeed breaking out: Allen West. Frank Morris was born on September 1, 1926 in Washington. He was orphaned at the fragile age of 11. He was placed in several foster homes and orphanages, and eventually ended up in a reform school. At 13, he was already a hardened criminal. His first conviction was for shoplifting, then for drug possession, armed robbery, and car theft. He serves time in Florida and Georgia prisons. He escaped from a Louisiana prison where he was serving a 10-year sentence for bank robbery. He was caught a year later in a burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January 20, 1960. In prison, he was tested, and his IQ was 133, placing him in the top 2% of smartest Americans. Allen West was born on March 25, 1929 in New York City. He has been arrested more than 20 times for various crimes. In 1955, he was arrested for stealing a car, and after attempting to escape from Florida State Prison, he was transferred to Alcatraz in 1957. He was then 28 years old. Brothers Clarence and John Anglin were born into a family with 13 children. As children, John and Clarence were inseparable. They became skilled swimmers and surprised their siblings by going swimming in the freezing waters of Lake Michigan while chunks of ice still floated on the surface. Even as teenagers, they began robbing gas stations and liquor stores, but were very strict and consistent about only entering to rob their establishments after they were already closed because they said they didn't want to risk anyone getting hurt. They only used a gun in one bank robbery in Alabama, and even then it wasn't a real gun. They didn't arrive in Alcatraz at the same time. John was transferred in October 1960 after attempting to escape from an Atlanta prison, and his brother Clarence in January of the following year. The Anglin brothers were friends with Frank Morris years before they entered Alcatraz. They met in the Atlanta jail, and Frank Morris and Allen West met inside Alcatraz, when Morris entering 3 years after West. The group's great luck was that when the brothers arrived, they were placed right next to Morris and West, who were already in adjoining cells. This sets off the grand conspiracy. Anyone would ask how the management allowed 4 hardened criminals who knew each other from before and had experience with prison breaks to be placed next to each other. The answer is that they allowed themselves this liberty because they were 100% sure that there was no escape from Alcatraz. It took creativity, ingenuity, and a little bit of luck for them to succeed in their escape plan, which took 8 months to execute. It all started when one of the inmates working on the electrics above Block B noticed a ceiling vent with a detachable cover, meaning one that was not sealed with concrete. It was possible to get out onto the roof through it. He shared this with Alan West, who in turn told Frank Morris about it. As soon as he heard this, Morris began to consider the plan, bearing in mind that a successful escape from Alcatraz consisted of 3 stages, each one more difficult than the last. Stage 1. You have to get out of your cell and out of the prison block. Stage 2. Once out of the prison block, the next step is to reach the water without attracting the attention of the guards. Stage 3. The hardest part. To swim across the icy water between Alcatraz and the San Francisco shore. 2 kilometers of water with a temperature of 10 degrees, strong current, sharp rocks, and the threat of sharks. This natural barrier is the main reason Alcatraz is considered a prison from which there is no escape. About a week after learning from West about the removable ceiling vent leading to the roof, Frank makes several important discoveries. One day, probably out of boredom, he starts chipping away at the concrete wall in his cell, and is surprised to find that the concrete is crumbling and making a small hole. Each cell has a 15-20 centimeter grill through which air enters from a covered corridor behind the wall. The frame of the vent in question was too narrow to pass through, but he already knew how easy it was to crumble the concrete, and therefore the hole could be widened as much as needed. He was also pleased to discover that the corridor behind the cell led to the ceiling vent that Alan West had told him about. With enough time and the right tools, the first stage, the escape from the cell, was now possible. Morris's next step was to form a team. Alan West was already in the game, sharing the information about the vent. He has one more credit. Working in a cleaning and repair group, he had access to places inaccessible to others. This is how he got hold of several tools forgotten in the trash, which he secretly transferred to Morris and the brothers' cells. He even found an electric motor from a vacuum cleaner, from which they made a drill. Everyone involved in the escape plan has a strategic task related to the access the work program has given them. Clarence Anglin works at the barbershop, John Anglin at the laundromat, so Morris easily convinces West that they're the right ones to join the team. As well as the tools, they stole a couple of spoons, which they adapt for digging. Thus, equipped with the right tools, the 3 begin to enlarge the ventilation shafts in each one's cells. They dig every night, under the cover of the music hour the prisoners are allowed. Frank Morris even plays the accordion to create a sound cover for their work. They strictly follow the digging order: 2 dig, 2 guard, then switch. Each night they separate some of the concrete, making sure the amount is no more than they can fit in their pockets so they can carry it out when they go to the yard for a walk. They cover the growing holes with cardboard, magazine pages, and paint. When the holes get big enough, Frank Morris crawls out into the hallway and goes to the vent West told him about to make sure that's really where the roof is accessible from. The first stage of the plan is complete, but there's still a long way to go before the escape. The next major challenge involves the ceiling vent leading to the roof. It is located just above the prison block, which means they'll have to spend weeks, maybe months, struggling with the bolts, in a location quite visible to the guards below. Again, Alan West finds a solution. He was given a job to paint the ceiling of the cell house and to remove the debris that he encountered along the way. Those areas on the top of the cell blocks were really dusty, and there were lots of paint chips up there. Alan persuaded the guards to allow him to hang drop cloths to keep the rubbish from falling onto the clean cell block floor. This trick provided the 4 with a cover to work behind. But not being seen upstairs isn't their only problem. Whenever they are there, they are not in their cells, which would be noticed immediately by the patrolling guards. That's where Clarence Anglin comes in with his barbershop job. The brothers have requested extra paint because they are painting portraits of their girlfriends. With this paint, toilet paper, and glue, each of the 4 makes a papier-mâché head to leave on the pillow while out of bed. The crucial detail is the real hair, which Clarence collects from the barbershop. Once they make the heads, they can sneak off to their workshop upstairs without worrying that a passing guard might suspect anything. Over the next few months, they gradually remove the bolts. The time has now come to deal with the 3rd stage of the escape. Neither Morris, West, nor the brothers have any delusions about swimming in the deadly waters. The low water temperature and strong currents make it nearly impossible to swim across. Even if they managed to crawl to shore, they would be too exhausted and cold to continue on. They need a way to cross the bay while staying as dry and fit as possible. Then Morris comes across an article in Popular Mechanics magazine that tells of a South Dakota man who made his own rubber goose for bait when hunting. Within 3 pages, it described in the greatest detail how to make an object out of pieces of rubber that would stay afloat. That's how they came up with the idea to make a raft. A few months later, a second article appeared in the same magazine, giving directions on how to make a life jacket out of spare materials. Because of the frequent rains on the island, all the prisoners were given raincoats to wear during their walks in the yard, so rubber material was plentiful. While the others were busy with the bolts, Alan West occupied himself with making the rafts and life jackets. He collected more than 50 raincoats from the other prisoners and glued them together using the heat from a hot pipe in the covered corridor and glue from the workshop. They also made paddles out of plywood. In the summer of 1962, all the components of the escape plan were in place. Getting out of the cells, going through the hidden corridor, getting on the roof, getting down to the ground. They now have 2 rafts and life jackets hidden and waiting to sail away. Everything is ready. During the evening of June 11, 1962, the plan was set in motion. Frank Morris removed the ventilation shaft in his cell and slipped through the hole, as he had done many times before. He then exits into the closed corridor. After a few minutes, the Anglin brothers also come out into the corridor. Only Alan West is still in his cell. The plan is for the first 3 to go and remove the ceiling vent, and for West to stay and watch for guards. He has to get out of his cell at the last possible moment, when the ceiling vent is already open. Morris climbs up several pipes like a ladder and reaches the vent leading to the roof. He removes the metal lid and pushes it open. A loud sound is heard from the moving of the cover, echoing throughout the building. The 3-man froze. The guard on duty hears the sound and calls the prison control center to report about the sound. The control center has access to microphones located throughout the building. The officer on duty decides that the sound came from the hospital unit. They send a guard to check, but he finds nothing unusual. Meanwhile, in the hidden corridor, the prisoners wait anxiously. A few minutes pass and they hear no alarm, giving them the confidence to proceed as planned. Morris returns to the hallway and signals to West that it's time to leave his cell. Alan lies down on the floor and kicks his vent shaft, expecting it to immediately fall, but the it doesn't move. Morris tries to help him, but the vent shaft won't come loose. After a few minutes, Clarence Anglin comes rushing to help as well, but with no result. Precious minutes are wasted, and the risk of failure grows. They have to carry on without West. Morris agrees to leave West everything he would need to escape in case he manages to get out of the cell. West watches from his window as his friends disappear, and realizes that his chances of getting out have melted away. The 3 of them move back down the hidden corridor, up the ceiling vent, and out onto the roof. Under the cover of the night, they crawl to the kitchen stovepipe, climb down to the ground, and crawl to the outer fence. Using improvised metal cutters, they cut the barbed wire and scramble over the fence. The 3 men reach the water. They inflate their raft with the help of Frank Morris's accordion, which has been adapted as a pump. They climb aboard and set sail. According to the military logs, on the evening of June 11, 1962, at about 11 o'clock when they set out, the tide was about 2 knots, or 3.5 kilometers per hour, which meant that they were slowly but surely drifting away from the shore of the island and being swept out to sea. Their destination was Angel Island, which is halfway off the coast of San Francisco. This concludes the officially known facts of this escape. At 7 a.m. the next morning, one of the guards wonders why Frank Morris doesn't wake up when they call him for breakfast. Reaching out to wake him, he pushes the fake head and finds out about the deception. They raise the alarm and began a search for the prisoners by air, water, and land that lasts 10 days. On June 14th, the Coast Guard finds one of the makeshift paddles floating about 200 meters off the south shore of Angel Island. On the same day, near that spot, workers from another boat found a package wrapped in plastic that contained names, addresses, and photographs of relatives and friends of the Anglin brothers. On June 21st, on the shore around the Golden Gate Bridge, connected pieces of raincoat resembling the fugitives' raft were found. The next day, one of the prison boats retrieved a life jacket made of the same material 50 meters off the Alcatraz coast. According to the FBI docket, no clues were found. The 3 men are believed to have drowned. Their main clue was a nylon-wrapped bundle belonging to one of the brothers. Their argument is that such a valuable item would never be discarded by its owner willingly. The temperature of the water on the night of the escape was about 10 degrees Celsius. According to experts, such cold water, the human body can last at most 2 hours before hypothermia sets in. In 2014, in a study of ocean currents, scientists at Delft University of Technology concluded that if the prisoners had left Alcatraz at 11:30 a.m., they could have made it to Horseshoe Bay, which lies north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and any debris from their gear would have been swept in the direction of Angel Island, including to where the paddle and other belongings were found. However, if they had left at any other time, the tides and currents were so strong that their chances of survival would have been minimal. The escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers gained great popularity in the media at the time, and shattered the myth of Alcatraz as an unescapable prison. That wasn't the only problem, however. Alcatraz cost 3 times more to maintain than an average federal prison. Its isolated location had caused severe erosion of its structure. Major repairs were needed, but Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy decided to close it. Alcatraz Prison closed its doors on March 21, 1963. Most inmates had life sentences or decades to serve, so they were returned to the mainland of U.S. Eventually, all the inmates, including Alan West, managed to escape from Alcatraz, just not in the way they expected. If you want another monkey story, watch this video about the Dyatlov Pass incident, the most chilling Soviet mystery of all time.